To say days 52 to 58 were action-packed would be an understatement. It all began where day 51 left off, at the fortress. I retrieved the repulsion machine from my storage and set off towards the basin. By 8 o'clock, I had it hooked up to the former research outpost and found a research part as a reward for my efforts. But this moment was cut short by the stark realization that I no longer had an excuse to avoid the basin. Rather, it was time to face it. I scouted the watery abyss for the samples the researcher had requested and fished for an anglerfish, 1/4 of the equation, in a trench that funneled out from the basin into open water. This was the moment I also discovered I need a hadal rod in addition to the abyssal rod to fulfill the researcher's sample requests. A discovery I quickly double-checked back at the fortress. Naturally, I was short the research part needed for this upgrade since I had used it moments before on another upgrade. This wasn't really a big deal though, since I knew the traveling merchant always had a steady supply in stock. Besides, the trip to the fortress provided an opportunity to catch a loose jaw and complete half of the assignment. With the bottomless line equipped, I wasted no time getting back to task. Circling along the perimeter of the basin, I set my spyglass on the remaining 2 samples so that by the time I activated the repulsion machine, I was ready to move in for the catch. Oh, I do not like going into the pit. It's so scary. Perhaps to be expected, the third item on the collector's list floated in the center of the basin, directly above the monster. Amphipod, giant amphipod. So what, like a giant, that'd be like a giant shrimp? Back at the fortress, I turned in the remaining 2 samples to the researcher, allowing her to complete her work. As it turns out, the samples I retrieved contained large concentrations of cellular mutations, a phenomena the researcher concluded owed to the creature in the basin. The researcher hoped this discovery would allow her to make waves in the scientific community. For my part, a shabby book would do. I mean, this book better have some good passive abilities or else we will be returning to the researcher, giving her a stern talking to, and probably taking that dog back. So concluded my business in Stellar Basin, and I took the opportunity to finally use the manifest ability. Back in the Marrows, I visited the collector in Blackstone Isle, who of course was up to his usual mischief. I gave him the ring and received the banish ability in return, an ability, in retrospect, that forewarned of the chaos that was to follow. The collector then told me that it was time to visit Twisted Strands, the penultimate stop in our journey. With no reason to stay in the Marrows any longer than needed, I was off. Of course. That little bump did this to my engines? I did not mean to use that. Just cruising. The eyes are looking at us again. I made it back to Greater Marrow just after midnight on day 54, and the light goes out. As was becoming the norm after recovering an artifact, the lighthouse keeper waited for me at the dock. I'm just fishing. Just lie to her. The mare then approached me, and I could tell from our conversation that I was not in fact looking my best. From that encounter, I can tell I'm not looking my best. I suppose 9 days without sleep has that effect. I repaired my ship and put some material towards a cargo upgrade before turning sail towards Twisted Strands. Plans momentarily postponed by yet another collision with a rock. After a brief stop in Greater Marrow, I was again headed northwest towards Twisted Strands. Along the way, I avoided getting wrecked by a gust of wind. Whoa, what is that? A frig? What the heck? Leave me alone, you gust. Dang, gust won't leave me alone. On the road again. On the road again. And narrowly escaped another run-in with the deranged stingray. Oh, not this thing again. He's faster than my ship. Holy shit, he's faster than my ship. You can't come up here, can you? Wait, you can now? To be fair, with maxed out panic levels, This was just par for the course. It should come as no surprise then that I wasn't fazed when a Lovecraftian tentacle came shooting out of the water. What was unexpected was my finding a friend in Moby fucking Dick. Dude, was that Dude, that was literally that's like the most classic mythological like sea battle there is. The giant squid or kraken versus the sperm whale. A yellow-hued mist told me that I had officially arrived in uncharted waters, something I momentarily relieved by visiting a familiar face. But I was unlikely to find the fourth artifact safely docked at the rickety pontoon. It was time to brave the swamps. Upon entering the first chamber of the swamps, I noticed a contraption that's savage appearance made me question every decision that had brought me here. There was some relief in the thought that it couldn't get any worse from here, but this idea was quickly shattered by what happened next. In this instance, a triumph of heart led to a brief chase with the swamp monster. If there was any doubt, it was now clear he was no friend. Continuing down the swamp, I came across a campsite tucked beneath the wings of a downed plane. Here, I found an airman who told me that he was all that was left of a crew that wrecked here long ago. More than safe passage out of the swamp, the airman wanted revenge against the mine suckers, the creatures from earlier, that had taken the lives of his crew. But the airman would need help, and who better for the task than yours truly? The airman then explained his plan, which consisted of 2 phases. First, he asked me to retrieve 2 parts of a mortar setup within the swamp, and second, to catch the fish needed for 3 types of bait and place them in traps designed to catch the mine suckers. Taken together, the plan was simple: lure the monsters into traps before the airman rained death from above. As an aside, the airman asked me to keep a lookout for the dog tags of his fallen brothers. Okay, so he needs us to find dog tags and mortars. I wonder if this is explodable. I recovered a message in a bottle before noticing I was short the mangrove rod I would need to fish in the region. Next, I arrived to the first location the airman had marked on my map and dredged up a mortar frame. Shortly after this, I came across another stone and received an omen. This one told a vision of a fleeing man cornered and killed by his pursuers. For once, I felt lucky to be on the water. I then came across a circular passage and finally understood the reason behind the Twisted Strands. And then this happened.
Oh, wow! Oh.
Resolving any confusion over the second half of the equation. If I didn't get out of this swamp soon, I'd be stranded like the airman. Day 55 began moments after my run-in with the Phantom Shark. I continued through the swamp, weaving my way through a waterway filled with exploding mushrooms. I fetched a message in a bottle before dredging up the mortar barrel, completing the first of the airman's 2 tasks. Fearing that another encounter like the one moments earlier would leave me worse than stranded, I decided to turn into the pontoon, and by fluke alone, avoided sudden doom by accidentally activating my banish ability.
Oh my god, did you see those vines?
At the docks, I repaired the damage to my ship and installed a hydraulic rod. I then fished for some gray mullet, which introduced another fishing minigame. I wanted to add here that, while the gameplay loop of Dredge is by no means complicated or even nuanced, the game always finds a way to add some new mechanic or minigame right before it begins to feel repetitive. I sold the gray mullet before repeating the process to fetch enough coin for the anti-tangle line, a rod I promptly installed. The time had come to return to the airman. I took the same route as before and passed the mine sucker, this time avoiding ticking him off. My last stop before the airman was a fish spawn beneath a mangrove root. Here, I caught some long fin eel. Gross.
Absolutely disgusting catching this.
At the campsite, the time had come for Phase 2, Operation Charlie and Kilo, capture and kill. You know those contraptions spotted around the strands? Well, those were traps for the mine suckers. Phase 2 then went like this. Lure the mine suckers into those traps with bait and let the airman take care of the rest. One of these traps called for 2 long-finned eels, the fish just caught moments ago. A quick trip to the spawn earned me the second eel called for in the bait. and I was off to the first
the
trap.
trap is, this thing. Later. Gotcha, you stupid mine sucker.
To say I was impressed with the airman's precision would be an understatement. I sold the 3 other eel I had caught before retrieving the mine sucker's remains and returning it to the airman. The airman was pleased with my work, but with 2 more mine suckers to go, the time hadn't come yet to celebrate. I had also caught some gray mullet and gar along the way back to the airman, remembering another one of the baits called for these fish. A few casts for sergeant fish interrupted my voyage to the second trap's location, but by 8 o'clock at night on day 56, another mine sucker went up in a cloud of smoke and flesh. 2 down, 1 to go. During the return trip to the airman, I finished A Plan for the Future, the book gifted to me by the researcher several days earlier.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what this does. Plan for the future.
I would be asking for that dog back. The airman explored another mine sucker's head with his knife before sending me for what looked like a catfish and gray mullet. I pulled into the floating dock at the beginning of day 57, sold the 3 sergeant fish for a sad sum, and installed a trawl net for more passive income. By morning, I caught the mullet needed for the 3rd bait off the coast before turning into the swamp.
Oh god, that scared the shit out of me. That's just a crocodile. I mean, not just. They're freaking horrifying, but...
I then spent the remainder of the day wandering around the swamps, finding some metal parts along the way. I had also developed a sneaking suspicion that catfish were nocturnal, which a catch just after dusk confirmed. With the last ingredient on board, the time had come to end the airman's feud. 1 entwined mullet and stretch of mushroom-fested waters later, and the time had come. I armed the trap with the bait and waited, this time deciding to blindly trust the airman's precision.
Pinpoint accuracy out of the former airman.
And by 6:30 on day 58, I dropped the final mine sucker's head before the airman. For my efforts, the airman gave me a necklace he had found in the last mine sucker's remains, which, surprise surprise, was the 4th relic on the collector's agenda. I then offered to ferry the airman far from these parts, an offer he refused to accept so long as his crewman's dog tags remained lost in the swamps. Now that the swamps were clear of its main threat, a fetch quest seemed the least of my worries. I told him I would help and began my search.
Oh, I just remembered, we need to have that, we need to have our trawl net in the water. Of course.
That is, until one of my routine crashes disabled my engines. A problem I had to solve by using the manifest ability to return to the Marrows. The airman would have to wait a little longer, but I made a promise to myself that I would return. Back at Blackstone Isle, the collector accepted the 4th artifact with warm welcome, giving me in return a new ability called Atrophy. Atrophy allowed me to instantaneously catch any fish in my surrounding area, and it was at this point, after a test run of the ability, that I finally got the feeling that I was on the wrong side. For now, though, I'd enjoy the quick money Atrophy offered me.